Every president since him has followed a rulebook. George Washington had to write it, in real time, with the entire world watching his very first move. He said it himself, in a private letter. As the first of everything, he wrote, every single habit he formed would become a precedent forever. One wrong move, and every future president might inherit a king instead of a servant. Washington understood the stakes better than anyone alive. So he built the cabinet from scratch, picked two of the sharpest minds in America to run it, and almost immediately regretted the choice. This is the story of a president inventing his own job as he went, and the internal war that job created almost immediately. The Constitution barely described the presidency at all. Most of its words went to Congress, leaving the actual executive office almost entirely undefined. Washington was the first man to actually hold the job, which meant every choice he made would quietly become law for every president after. Even the title mattered enormously. Some senators pushed for His Majesty, or His Highness, Protector of our Liberties, echoing the monarchy they had just escaped. Washington personally rejected all of it. He insisted on something plainer, something almost stubbornly ordinary. Simply, quietly, Mr. President. He gave the first inaugural address ever delivered, in front of a Congress that had absolutely no idea what a president was even supposed to sound like. He created the very idea of a cabinet, a private circle of advisors, even though the Constitution never once used that word or required it. Congress itself only created 3 departments that year: War, State, and Treasury, plus an Attorney General, built from absolutely nothing in a matter of months. Washington also quietly decided he could remove a cabinet secretary anytime he wanted, without asking the Senate. He simply never actually had to test it. Every single one of these choices was invented on the spot. There was no manual. There was only Washington deciding what the presidency would even mean. To fill that new cabinet, Washington picked 2 of the most brilliant men in the entire country, and almost nothing else about them matched at all. Alexander Hamilton became Secretary of the Treasury. Thomas Jefferson became Secretary of State. Both men assumed their own job was secretly the most important one. Hamilton was loud, aggressive, and endlessly ambitious. He wanted a powerful federal government, a booming commercial economy, and closer ties with Britain. Jefferson was quieter, more indirect, and just as stubborn underneath it. He wanted a farming nation, strictly limited government, and a close bond with France. At first, the 2 men actually got along fairly well. Hamilton asked Jefferson's opinion. Jefferson even nominated Hamilton for a scholarly society. But Washington had oversold both jobs while recruiting them. Hamilton started calling it my administration. Jefferson believed he ran every domestic affair alone. Naturally, each man began seeing the other as an intrusive rival, constantly overstepping the boundaries of his own supposedly separate territory. Jefferson privately wrote that Hamilton's allies formed a corrupt squadron of paper dealers. Hamilton privately called Jefferson's circle a faction dangerous to the Union. Washington had wanted balance in his cabinet. What he actually built was the opening act of America's first real political civil war. Hamilton's Regal Jurisneri is that many of Church are Roman. The first real test came in 1791. Hamilton proposed something enormous: a national bank, modeled directly on the Bank of England. Jefferson was horrified. Nowhere, he argued, did the Constitution actually grant the federal government any power to create a bank at all. Jefferson called it a strict reading of the Constitution. Whatever wasn't explicitly written down, he believed, simply wasn't allowed to happen. Washington was reportedly ready to veto the entire bill. Then he asked Hamilton for one final written opinion before making it official. Hamilton reportedly wrote his entire defense overnight by candlelight, using a quill pen. The final document ran past 15,000 words. His argument was simple but radical. If the Constitution allowed a goal, it also allowed any reasonable, necessary tool to actually reach that goal. It became known as loose interpretation, built on the Constitution's own necessary and proper clause. Washington read both arguments and sided with Hamilton. he signed the bank into law. It was the first time an American president had to personally referee a fight over what the Constitution even meant. The bank itself worked remarkably well. Only 3 banks existed in the country in 1789. Within 2 decades, there were over 100. But Jefferson never forgot the loss. To him, it proved exactly what he'd feared about Hamilton and the federal power he kept quietly expanding. The bank fight was only the beginning. Underneath it sat 2 totally different visions for what kind of country America was even supposed to become. Hamilton wanted cities, factories, and a powerful national government steering the economy. Jefferson wanted independent farmers and a government that mostly stayed out of the way. Then came foreign policy, and things got even messier. France and Britain were now at war, and both men wanted America to lean in opposite directions. Washington chose neither side. In 1793, he declared official American neutrality, a decision both cabinet members found ways to quietly resent. A treaty with Britain, negotiated by one of Hamilton's closest allies, pushed things past the breaking point. Jefferson's side called it outright betrayal. By 1792, Washington finally realized the truth. This wasn't simple policy disagreement anymore. It had become deeply, painfully personal between them. In 1793, Jefferson finally resigned from the cabinet entirely, walking away to build his own organized political opposition from the outside. Washington's dream of one unified administration, one shared vision for the country, had quietly and completely fallen apart in under 4 years. And out of that collapse came something the founders had specifically hoped to avoid entirely: America's first 2 organized political parties. Then, in the middle of all this, an actual armed rebellion broke out on American soil, testing Washington in a way nothing else ever had. To help pay off the massive debt from the Revolution, Hamilton had pushed through a new federal tax on whiskey, the very first of its kind. Frontier farmers in western Pennsylvania relied on whiskey as currency itself, since coins were scarce out on the edge of the country. To them, the tax felt like a direct, personal attack. Their rallying cry became simple and blunt. "Liberty," they shouted, "and no excise." By the summer of 1794, armed mobs were burning tax collectors' homes and threatening federal officers sent to enforce the new law. Washington faced a genuine constitutional first. Could the young federal government actually enforce its own laws by force inside its own borders? He tried negotiation first, sending commissioners to meet directly with rebel leaders. When that failed completely, he called up nearly 13,000 militia. Then Washington did something no sitting American president has ever done again. He personally rode out west to lead the army himself. He led them as far as Bedford, Pennsylvania, before handing command to a trusted general, and finally turning back toward the capital. When the massive federalized militia finally arrived in western Pennsylvania, they found almost nothing waiting for them. The rebellion had simply melted away. A couple of rebel leaders were eventually convicted of treason. Washington personally pardoned both of them, the very first presidential pardons in history. Without firing a single shot in that final march, Washington had proven something enormous. Federal law could actually be enforced peacefully, and it would be obeyed. In 1796, Washington chose to do something else no one had asked of him. He simply walked away from power, completely. He could have stayed president for life. Instead, he stepped down after 2 terms, quietly inventing yet another unwritten rule for the entire country. In his farewell address, he warned bitterly against the rise of political factions and permanent parties, exactly the divide his own cabinet had helped create. That 2-term precedent held for nearly a century and a half, until Franklin Roosevelt broke it, and Congress finally wrote Washington's own habit into law. Every precedent in this story, the cabinet, the 2 terms, the use of federal force, still quietly shapes the presidency, sitting in the Oval Office today. Washington never had a rulebook to follow. He just had to write one impossible decision at a time, and hope the country survived it.